My presentation is going to differ greatly to Xanthi's on partly this is my first time public speaking, so it's actually heavily scripted. I hope that is still fun to some degree. Firstly, I would like to start by thanking experimenter Emil Zeil, and the curator of Another Space, Yandel Walton. I'm extremely privileged to be given this platform to express thoughts and feelings about my art practice in relation to recent projects. A good starting point is my recent project Tonomi, or Eyes of the Hand, which is currently still in a kind of developmental phase. Upon being asked by Yandel to be a part of Another Space at Testing Grounds, I felt it was a perfect opportunity to fast-track the work into participatory usability. Tonomi, in its functionality, is a wearable misappropriation of consumer home security cameras and their software. The cameras are mounted to the gloves that then stream to a mobile phone mounted in low-tech VR headsets. Aesthetically, the work is inspired by the appearance of Tonomi, a Japanese yokai or monster, and the pale man from Pan's Labyrinth, who it is said is also inspired by Tonomi. Tonomi is the story of a blind man who was killed by bandits. The man died with a grudge against his hands for not having defended him. The blind man is said to have returned as a monster, carrying his hands, stalking the edge of rural villages, looking for his attackers. Apparently, he also sucks the flesh and bones out of any unlucky traveller who happens to cross his path. Along with Tonomi, the J.G. Ballard short story Manhole 69 also coloured my imagination from an early age. A story in which two scientists experiment on patients in aims to eradicate the need for sleep. Sleep being something I'm deeply interested in, or rather lucid dreaming, but that's for another time. So whilst in pursuit of this, something happens which causes the patient's overstimulation in a feedback loop, which causes a kind of consciousness overload collapse, which makes them perceive the room in which they are present to slowly close in and entomb them. The room is described as, in my mind, basically a white cube or a gallery space. I would also have some remarkably similar experiences experimenting with the spatial augmentation qualities on loosely controlled doses of ketamine. Cyborg vision in science fiction films such as Terminator was also an inspiration. For Tonomi, essentially your left and right eyes are placed into your left and right hands, enabling the user the ability to formulate an altered state of vision in coordination with the palms of their hands. The displacement of the eyes leads to a rather interesting spatial experience, as one is to feel their self around, so to speak. The user will experience double vision that can be fixed by training the hands onto something in front of them. I encourage this with large X's taped onto the walls that I think of as non-image images, like a target for visual calibration. I find that once this is achieved, sometimes through some degree of difficulty, that the user can either choose to explore their surroundings in this mode of seeing, or slowly move their hands to view multiple perspectives at once. With some familiarization, it is entirely possible to differentiate the double overlaid vision and, for instance, look at your feet while you admire your face, or make hand-eye contact with two people at once. This is when spatial orientation becomes particularly ruptured, often resulting in hilarity for those observing. Some things I found particularly striking were the performative element and the diversity of the responses. Also, just how interested and eager people were to try it. It was the classic case of becoming so close to your own work and how you view it that in a way you sometimes forget how others may interpret it. This, of course, is also a beautiful thing. I had always intended for the user wearing the device to cut a particular figure, that of a pseudo-scientific monstrosity, and to some degree for people to appear to move like zombies, robotically, or Frankenstein-esque. What I didn't expect, however, what could only be described as dancing with your hands and other bizarre bodily responses, such of which were quite beautiful to watch. I'm sure you have noticed by now I have alluded to an interest in science fiction and horror. I think both genres are useful vessels for storytelling. I think horror in particular the Gothic and cosmic horror went at length to explore the changing electrified landscape of the industrial era, with cautionary tales surrounding scientific advancement and fear of the unknown, while science fiction deals with similar, more contemporary themes, often foreshadowing ethical dilemmas associated with speculative futures. The mode in which I'm using these kind of references for Tonomi, anyway. The mode in which I'm using these kind of references for Tonomi is ironic to a degree, or playful. Whilst I think, I'm just going to go back. Excuse me. Whilst I think the work is legitimately interesting exploration in altered modes of seeing and spatial ramifications for the body, the ironic layer is aimed at poking a bit of fun at visual technologies and their application, particularly the notions of consumer products which allow us to see more, like the total vision of 360-degree filmic sight, that we can then upload and share our experience that we have gleaned from the surface of the world. What I actually find is our direct experience of being in the world is rather diminished as we take the role of directing curators of our own image experience. This is something I'll touch on a bit more later as it connects to my photographic practice, or rather has marked the way in which I think about photographic ways of seeing. It might also have something to do with my earlier teenage addiction to video gaming. So something for me that is actually quite important about Tonomi is a sensation that occurs when you take it off. Tonomi is of a lineage of work that links to Telekeric Loop, which is showing at the moment. This is currently also being shown at Testing Grounds. This work was conceived in 2015 for the show In the Epoch of the Near and Far, curated by Amelia Winata in conjunction with Channel's Video Art Festival. Telekeric Loop was what I consider to be my first video work, and also when I started to work with the idea of taking one's eyes out of their body. Telekeric Loop was filmed from a drone which hovered above me, interchanging between third-person perspectives, a natural perspective in many role-playing and adventure video games, and a satellite or drone's eyes overhead perspective. I controlled the drone, or RC, which is short for rotocopter, as most hobbyists don't feel comfortable with the military connotation. Anyway, so I controlled the drone with a radio controller and had VR flight goggles connected to the camera in the drone. At first, the idea was to get a kind of displaced subjectivity in viewing myself and simply following myself around to reflect how it felt to see the body seeing itself. That was in a visible field that is completely unnatural and to a degree a non-human or machinic way of seeing. As you can imagine, I looked completely ridiculous. What quickly becomes of interest to me was the fact that I was effectively controlling my eyes with my hands and to the extreme phenomenological severance that was occurring, an extreme bizarre oscillating sensation that bounced back and forth. Very parched. For instance, if I was to stop moving completely, there would almost be this feeling of being completely lost. Where are my eyes exactly? Now this could either cause one to panic, or strangely it felt quite meditative. Almost like the sensation of being in a float tank for a few hours condensed into a few fleeting seconds. However, all it would take for is the wind to blow sensation onto the body and it would awaken, collapsing the layers. There you go, I just set up another model for monetization. Deep relaxation from the 24/7 neuro labor grind. $70 for 5 seconds. Get some water, excuse me. In terms of presentation, I decided to project the video onto a disc on the floor. This was so that the audience would have to huddle around the disc and peer down into it, enacting the same perspective as a drone. Also, I felt it quite effectual, encouraging unusual body sensations and feelings of slight disorientation. The circular shape of the course a reference to the eye, and reference to the pool in which Narcissus drowned in a feedback loop of himself. I choose to follow Marshall McLuhan's observation that Narcissus, which translates to numbness, was so numbed by the image of themselves that they forgot they were looking at an image of themselves. Because I believe our technologies are an extension of us. This is, of course, a reference to myself in this scenario. The activation of bodily sensation overcomes the numbness. I also like to think of the projector mounted on the ceiling as the drone or a satellite, as they're not exactly invisible objects in installations. Who knows, maybe the universe is a holographic projection existing within an incomprehensible extra-dimensional space. The kind of line of thinking reminds me of Stanislaw Lem Solaris and the question of limits of human ontological knowledge. We are always at the center projecting out onto things. In 2015, I showed the work 1/60th of a second f-stop 5 at TCB. I'm just going to focus on the video element of the work. It was presented on an iPad in the middle of the back space. It was a 360 panorama of the room in which the work itself was shown. Using the panorama, I then made a video where the perspective shifts and slides around the room, wildly distorting and contorting the space in the hand within the image. There was a large cutout of my hand photographed in the space during the panorama. The work was presented as a video and not an interactive panorama like in Google Street View, so that for a moment, maybe the approaching audience assumes some kind of interactivity or control, only to have it elude them with a camera apparatus seemingly acting of its own invisible logic. I have long been interested in the idea of the collapse of the near and far, cameras and screens bringing the world to us, something which could be said is anti-phenomenological. Paul Virilio used an interesting word to describe this, the logistics of perception. You need not go anywhere. Digital logicalistic systems will funnel the information to you. I was also thinking of elements of the post-internet, the art at the time, or post-internet art, or rather the material deployment of 2D cutout sculptural images into a space. That kind of slick looking for the purpose of documentation, the awareness of the network and how people will view the work online rather than in real life. With this in the back of my mind, I thought it might be interesting to re-encounter a space in which one is already situated, yet have it performing, so to speak, in some entirely alien or monstrous way. In this work, I feel the hand and the TCB floor become the actors. My sunglasses are also in there somewhere. There are slippages and digital artifacting in the stitching between the images making up the panorama. I thought this was a good expression or a breakdown in the facade of a completely uncanny rendering of something proposing to be objectively real. Once again, the work aims to activate or play on some kind of effectual sense of uneasiness. The hand motif, something which consistently appears in my work, often unconsciously, holds a special place in my lexicon as a kind of navigator, the conductor, the original tool. I believe hands contain their own kind of knowledge, or rather have helped sculpt our own knowledge systems, aiding us through evolution. In a broader sense, along with our bodies, they conduct our reality, so to speak, as the mind processes information feeding back through the sensory system. Hands act and eyes observe. That's why I have certain issues with the branch of posthumanists that champion the idea of the mind upload. Can the mind exist purely as data, undervaluing the complete system of the organism in the formulation of knowledge, to a way of thinking that is totally mind-centric? Surely a mind couldn't even function. I guess it would be truly post-human though, post-desire, post-empathy, post-death. With the desire to live forever that funds this research in effect cancel itself out, to live forever and desire nothing, and by desire I mean the will to actualize anything. This was also a video that I had in the TCB show. It was hidden around the corner. I thought I would just show that as well. It's reappropriating old scientific videos. That was, hidden in the backspace for anyone who decided to peek around. The last exhibition I would like to talk about is Speculative Foundations. Shown at Sutton Projects in 2016, this body of work succinctly ties in my interest in photographic ways of seeing with the work I have spoken about previously this evening. With Speculative Foundation, the video works were all filmed in situ and represented at a 1-to-1 ratio in space. The rationale was that as a person got closer to one of the videos, they may notice that from a certain perspective, it would lock into the visible field. Obvious flaws in this involve variation in height amongst audience members for some of the videos, but I still think it was rather successful. It would cause some viewers to jostle until they found themselves in the particular photographic position, which triggers a sense of ease. It's like something to do with the brain trying to solve a problem in perspective, and once it does, you have found yourself in the ghost space of the camera operator. This is something that really interests me, the eye behind the lens. I hope to work with this idea in the future, something like the invisible movements or choreography for invisible videographers. Indeed, I was thinking of the screens as some kind of slice in space in which some kind of invisible actions could be made, like the hand marking an invisible spell boundary, encircling a viewer, hypnotizing them as the crosshair comes in and out of connection in the concrete floor. Another screen showed a tilt shot, bringing the floor or ceiling to the horizon, something I'm clearly becoming obsessed with. Many people remarked that they thought the screen was live video on account of seeing people move past the window on the video screen, only for it to dip into the floor. Another screen simply stood in for the corner of the room, rendered in stunning HD. Its luminous qualities promised some kind of moment or movement that never arrives. You're just standing there, staring at the corner of the room, waiting for something to happen. There's such poverty there, it's kind of beautiful. Another screen shows a drone hovering outside the window. I guess you could say that represents some kind of paranoia. The screen looking back. So I think the way tools influence the way we think is really powerful. It's a relationship of feedback. I'd say I'm a visual learner, and I remember a time when I would envisage marks being made on paper in my mind to recall mathematical equations or recalling how to draw an object. Now it's more like 3D Max or Photoshop up in there. These interfaces, those tools, have become ways of expression of ideas in my mind. I think we can create computers to think like us. Now I think we are beginning to think like computers. Maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but I definitely think photographic cameras have changed the way in which we view the world. Even as simply as the framing of reality, a super basic example could be that when you look at something and you're like, yes, this is what constitutes a picture. This is the decisive moment. It's like we start to think in things of terms of constant image potential. I find I have to fight it, and often I see something that looks interesting or go on a trip, I deny myself use of the camera. My favorite quote among the many from Susan Sontag is, "Everything today exists to end in a photograph." By this point, it may seem like I hate photography, and that's partly true, but I also adore it. It's a complicated relationship. I hate the way it's used for endless publication of the self and its role in shaping, or rather selling, ideas of being and lifestyle. Basically, I hate advertising and marketing's terraformation of the media and psychosphere. More and more I realize part of my modus operandi is a kind of experimental play and subtle tinkering. For example, playing with home security cameras to depower them of their intended market-driven process and use them to tinker with vision and perspective. I like tinkering with perspective to rather disrupt or disorientate, as I believe that when we reorientate ourselves or process a shift in altered states of vision or sensation, a small space opens up for some kind of reflection. And in a world that's increasingly speeding up, it's good to have your balance thrown off every now and then. How am I doing for time? Wow. Anyway. One thing I'd like to add to make sense of this, my earliest memories of childhood were that I used to watch television upside down. And I can't remember what the rationale for that was, but I vaguely remember thinking that I could kind of recreate my own kind of relationship to the image rather than what was just transmitted to me. I used to do that with magazines as well. Anyway, that's the end. I'd like to end on this image because I think it's actually amazing. Anyway. Thank you for listening. Sorry about my nerves.